Walz and Vance are set to debate, and it may be the last predictable moment of the campaign. We'll talk about what to expect. At the top of the ticket, the DNC is trying to generate a debate about the lack of more debates. We'll talk about whether this ever works. The GOP has a wee bit of a Mark Robinson problem, and they have no idea how to just disavow a dude, apparently. We'll take a hard look at the Trump ground game to see what's there exactly. We'll also compare Harris messaging to Trump messaging as a preview. There's one very noticeable difference. Finally, we'll give a general update on polling, and by popular request, we'll review some of the more consequential down ballot races across the country and talk about where we think your efforts are best spent. Ravi will no doubt try and sneak in all sorts of stuff about the Bills because they had a good week. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family members to join our majority. This is Majority 54.
Well, Jason, we are set for another debate next week, perhaps the last debate of this cycle. And as you mentioned, perhaps the last predictable collective moment of this campaign. And Walz and Vance are set to face off. And we know a little bit now about the prep process. There have been some articles about this. Interestingly, Mayor Pete is playing JD Vance in prep, which I think is a smart choice. He's got the pedigree for it, but also you could imagine he's pretty sophisticated messenger. He's probably doing more than just pretending to be Vance. And we got to worry about Mayor Pete, by the way. I just watched this Sopranos docu-series on HBO where basically Gandolfini became Tony Soprano after a while and basically couldn't stop behaving like him. So steer clear of Pete in the next few weeks after this debate. It'll probably take a while to get that
I don't know. Pete speaks several languages. He can go in and out of those. He can probably go in and out of bigotry too, or whatever, the language is to speak Vance. I personally, I don't know about you, I would much rather debate actual JD Vance than Pete Buttigieg pretending to be JD Vance. I feel like he'll be more formidable.
I've long said that Pete is one of the smartest people in politics I've ever met. It's interesting you find somebody there's like politics smart, and then there's like smart, and rare do those two things come together.
Yeah.
And he has both of those things. It's like Bill Clinton was like that too. You're like that.
Yes.
And it's like, it's just rare.
I appreciate that, but I feel like if you're going to compare that, I feel like I have the whatever the dynamism gravitas thing is, but then Pete has if you were choosing people and you were like, we don't need this person to be an astronaut, but we're going to train them to be an astronaut.
Right.
And we're going to teach them all the science. And it came down to me and Pete. I'd be like, take Pete,
yes.
because he has that thing where he also has where I'm sure he nails every standardized test he takes. I'm sure you know what I mean? And that's not me. I'm folksy politician smart, and he's smart. So
there used to be a saying, I forgot who said it. It might've been Trent Dilfer was talking about different quarterbacks at the time. And he was like, among the elite quarterbacks, who's the one who's going to get the car keys if they have to go on a road trip or something? And I think among sort of elite politicians and strategists, Pete is often the guy. People are like, yeah, I respect that guy. They respect his game. On the other side is, preparing JD Vance and acting as Tim Walz is House Republican Whip Tom Emmer from Minnesota. So he's in Walz's neck of the woods, and he's been apparently reviewing tape of Walz's past debates in order to copy his mannerisms and his stances. And we get a little sense about how this is going to go down. Mayor Pete did an interview with Ezra Klein in which he said he's going to focus on Vance's faux populism, which obviously seems like a smart angle here. What do you expect? I'm a little nervous about. I'll put my cards on the table. I'm a little nervous about this VP debate, but what are you expecting?
Well, I'm a little nervous too, but the reason I'm nervous is because I feel like it's mostly downside for us, because the difference between the two tickets is that Trump is a completely known quantity. Whereas, Harris, as we'll get to later, both campaigns are still working to define Harris. And one of the things that people can use to define a presidential candidate is the person that they chose for their running mate. And so as a result, I feel like we have more to lose. They have more to gain. in this debate. So it's not a question of who I think will do a better job. It's more that just like I think even if Tim Walz absolutely decimates JD Vance, which Vance is not Trump. I don't think he's going to decimate JD Vance. But even if he did, I don't think we gain that much from it. But if something goes wrong and there's a real faux pas by Walz or something like that, which I don't think is likely, but it can happen for either candidate, I think that is potentially much more damaging to Harris than the reverse would be for Trump, because people are still some people are still making up their mind about what they think about her because she's not as well known to them.
Yeah, you can imagine the many scenarios that could go poorly for Democrats, and it all starts with the incredibly low expectations for JD Vance. He is so hated, and he's made his own bed here. He's so hated. People are always waiting for him to say something crazy, even to the point where when he says things that are actually halfway normal in our politics, it ricochets through the internet. And this all worries me because low expectations are the secret to winning a debate. George W. Bush was the king of this. And so it's not going to take a lot for Vance to do well. Now, for Walz, what the playbook is going to be against him. It's going to be to talk about like different statements he's made and inconsistencies, or as they see it, exaggerations, and they'll try to make a lot out of that. And he'll, inevitably be practiced on how to like focus it back on the American people. I would say that the one way we could declare this a victory for Walz, obviously, if Vance does all his crazy Vance stuff, that won't help them. But I'm not sure how that really does anything to this race, because that's already baked in. The one way I could see Walz winning this debate in a way that's actually meaningful in this campaign is if he nails the economic message and somehow is able to like speak truth, as we talked about last week, about where we are without seeming out of touch. I think it's really important that Democrats don't play defense here and, like downplay what has been, I think, a very strong economic record, but somehow able to do that while not walking into some trap that they don't understand the plight of the American people. And you got to expect Pete and Walz and everybody else on that team have something in store. And if they can nail that, that's a win.
Well, and that leads to a mistake that Trump made in the debate and makes every day pretty much, that Vance is very unlikely to make, which is Trump takes everything so personally. You're not going to be able to bait Vance that way. He's smarter than that. He's better at this than that. He's polished. He, like Walz, is going to consistently be trying to pivot things back to how it affects the viewer. But there's a difference. Walz wants to talk about, real stuff, how it affects your pocketbook, what's actually fair. He's going to talk about the influence of corporations. He's going to talk about those things. And where Vance wants to go is he wants to talk about how things are affecting, cultural issues. He wants to talk about how, Tim Walz wants your daughter to have to compete in sports against boys, and, made up stuff like that. So that's the box he wants to live in. Walz wants to live in the other box, but both are probably going to do a skilled job at not taking the bait. And there'll be plenty of it. I mean, particularly from Vance. I just saw a video today where Vance is playing like a shooter video game, and he says something about how this is closer than Tim Walz ever got to combat, which, as an aside, is just really dangerous stuff. Like, I work in the veteran world, and I work with some of the most grizzled, most experienced, combat veterans. And, whereas I'm like, I just accepted the idea that I was a combat veteran a few years ago, and guys with multiple deployments, Purple Hearts, that kind of thing. And we all understand when you talk that way, you add to the suicide problem among vets, because you get more. It's called gatekeeping, and I believe that Vance is going to say some gatekeeping stuff about military service during this debate, and I think it's going to do real damage to real people. Just as an aside, it's something for people to watch for.
Well, on the top of the ticket, Harris is continuing to push for a debate. The DNC has taken out ads calling Trump a chicken. They were going to send people dressed in chicken suits, which has a storied history in America. Back in '92, the Clinton campaign did this, where they were sending people in chicken suits out to debates or to town halls that George H.W. had, calling him Chicken George, to the point where I think he got an argument with one of the people in chicken suits, which was the president of the United States arguing with somebody in a chicken suit. That actually worked. And, not only did George H.W. back down and have debates, but his son, anticipating the same thing, he was trying to evade debates in 2000, didn't want another Chicken George situation, so wound up also capitulating and having a debate. Jason, do you think we're going to have a second debate or a third, depending on how you're counting it?
No, I don't think we're going to have another debate. And I usually would say that, this doesn't work anymore. I mean, for one thing, the reason that the George H.W. Bush chicken suit thing worked is because back then our politics were so stage managed, and you could so highly produce everything. The access to the candidate wasn't, there was no social media. So spontaneous moments in campaigns were so rare that when you had one, it was a huge deal. And we just have them like every day now. In fact, sometimes campaigns are trying to create spontaneous moments in order to show that their candidate's a real person, right? So I don't think it rings the same way. However, I think it's worth trying, because I think, Trump is a unique candidate in that anything you do that gets under his skin generally gets under his skin. and so it doesn't mean that you're more likely to get a debate necessarily, but it means you're more likely to have him complaining about it, off his game, to the extent that he has any kind of predictable game. I don't think so. I actually think, I saw where there's talk about there being a 60 Minutes interview, like real close to the election, where Kamala sits down with 60 Minutes and then Trump sits down with 60 Minutes. And I think that may happen. But I don't think, look, if you were Trump, would you want any more of that smoke? I don't think you would.
Well, here's what he had to say. Let's go to a clip.
She's done one debate. I've done two. It's too late to do another. I'd love to in many ways, but it's too late. The voting is cast. The voters are out there immediately. Is everybody voting? Please get out and vote.
Well, needless to say that in previous cycles, he's had debates well into the early vote and later than I think what the next proposed debate is.
Well, what a ridiculous thing. Like, it's too late to have a debate because people are already voting. Well, then why are you having a rally? Like, right. I mean, if it doesn't matter, let's all just freaking go on vacation for the next 40 some days.
So there's I'm actually perplexed by this, because if my instinct would have been, if you're Harris, you don't want another debate because you did well. And from what I understand, the numbers internal to the campaign are decent. Like, election held today, they're probably more likely to win than not. And if you're Trump, you'd want the debate under the rules of politics, because you lost the first one and you're probably slightly behind. And most of the election models probably have him as a slight underdog. I mean, ever so slight, like 45% probability, which people tend to misunderstand what that means. That still means that it's kind of a coin flip. It doesn't mean 45% of the vote, which is very different than 45% probability. I think people in 2016 continue to misunderstand what 2016's election models were saying, which was, I forget what the number was. Let's say 1 in 5 chance or something that Trump was going to win. 1 in 5 actually happens 1 in 5 times. Yeah. That's going to happen.
Exactly. Look, yes, the basic rules of political physics dictate that momentum wise, Trump should want a debate, right? And I think if she continues on this trajectory, if the polling looks similar in 2 weeks, perhaps his team is going to be like, let's do a debate. But the other problem they have is that the debate wasn't close, and it wasn't helpful. No matter what he says, it wasn't helpful to them in any way. Now, you have to figure a second debate goes better for him on the basis of, one, the expectation for him will now be extremely low, because you'll have people tuning in who maybe didn't see the first debate or did see the first debate. Either way, they will have either heard that he did a terrible job or they remember that he did a terrible job. So if he just comes out and sticks to a few talking points for the first 30 minutes of the debate, they're gonna be like, wow, he did a lot better. So that would dictate that he needs it. But the problem is, like, we don't know what other tricks she has up her sleeve for the second one. That's got to be their attitude. And so as a result, I think if I'm Trump's people, I'm going, look, In 2016, it looked like we were going to lose, but it turned out there were enough, really rabid people out there for us that turned out that we did win. And so to me, that's my win scenario. And it doesn't include trying to win over a lot of persuadable voters the rest of the way, because I don't think that's exactly Trump's specialty.
Yeah, it's like, this is what's so perplexing about it. What it takes for Trump to quote unquote win a debate is so low. He just needs to get up there and not say the crazy things he was saying, and the people will declare that a win for him. Like, that's all it would take. And it shows you just how undisciplined he is, that nobody seems to think he's even capable of that.
Well, and part of being undisciplined is that in order to get up and stick to the things that you're supposed to say, you have to have the attention span to sit down and learn what those things are. And the reason that his speeches are just these long meandering things is because he doesn't learn what those things are. He doesn't care about those things. I think, just doesn't trust anybody else. Look, I think that the crowds are a narcotic for him, and the more the further out there he goes and the more provocative he is, the bigger reaction he gets from the crowds. And so that's his test. That's how he road tests his material, and then it works there, so that's what he uses. And so I wouldn't subject my side to that if I were them.
Well, let's pivot back to JD Vance for a second here. He went to a supermarket or grocery store, depending where you live in this country. You call it different things. And
y'all call it a supermarket?
We call it supermarket. Yeah.
Okay.
And let's put this up. He was trying to make a point about inflation, was talking about how these eggs are, I think he said $4. And lurking in the background is the actual price tag of the eggs, $2.99. And this is not a profound point, but it's just yet another piece of evidence of how full of shit this guy is.
I mean, it's just, you're going to believe me or your lying eyes, this reminded me of the, what's his name? Pennsylvania, Oz. The crudité video.
Yeah. We've been podcasting for a while, because it's crazy to think about. That was 2 years ago now. That was crudité. That felt like yesterday. Speaking of Vance, he was asked, and we should give ourselves a pat on the back. We brought up Robinson last week, randomly,
right before everything went.
Yeah, and we were kind of, I guess, reading the tea leaves on that. But we'll talk a little bit about Robinson. But I'm sure the listeners are familiar now that the gubernatorial candidate in North Carolina had a huge scandal involving.
Oh wait, can I help here? Because I did another podcast the other day.
Go for it. Yeah. Describe it, please.
Harry Littman described the website on which Robinson made these comments, and the word he used was a word I had never heard before, but I think is a real word, and it was alt perv. He was on an alt perv website, which seems like, it's like, was it perv? No. It was alt perv. It was like, if you want perverted stuff, but you like it mixed in with some alt-right, really frightening misogyny and racism, that's where I guess you go to an alt perv website.
And before we get to Vance's take on this, like, the important caveat to make about all of this, not knowing anything about what alt perv is that the crime here is not whatever is going on with him and his sexuality and his expression and all of that. The crime is the hypocrisy, number one. And number two, and we showed the video last week of him literally lecturing women about not being able to control themselves. But also he said, and we don't need to go through this here, like, he called himself a black Nazi. He said he wanted to own slaves. I mean, he could just go on and on and on.
Talked about raping women, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's insane. Now, given how clear and immoral some of the things this gentleman said, this would be a great moment for JD Vance to be like, you know what? I know you expect me to zag here, but I'm just going to zig. I'm just going to say this was wrong and this guy needs to step down. Let's go to what JD Vance actually had to say here.
Do you believe him that those were not his posts?
I don't not believe him. I don't believe him. I just think that you have to let these things sometimes play out in the court of public opinion.
Okay. Let's compare this to the Democratic side of things. You know, Menendez was found with all these gold bars in his basement, and Democrats weren't like, well, you know, let's see what happens. Democrats were like, yes, this guy needs to leave the Senate now. He has to go. Now, there are also political implications here that Vance is trying to navigate, right? Which is they kind of pretty much have to win North Carolina.
Yeah.
It is as close to a must-win state for them as it can be. And that part of that means that if the gubernatorial candidate, you know, the gubernatorial candidate for them can lose, but if the gubernatorial candidate plummets so far that he becomes an anchor and pulls them underwater, that's a problem. So for them, they don't know what to do, right? Like on the one hand, you want to jettison that gubernatorial candidate to try and keep your boat above the water. But if you do that, ironically, that may pull the entire Republican tide down and sink you. And so it is a hard one for them.
And honestly, you just have to pick better candidates. Like this guy was clearly loony from the get-go. Like we were just talking about last week stuff that was already in the domain of public opinion. It's been well known that this guy is abnormal. If you look at his background, he really had nothing. Like there's nothing really he's running on, right? Yeah. And he's running against Stein, who's the attorney general of the state, and just got like a really strong track record. It's like not even close. Yeah, I don't think there's really much more to talk about there, but I think the big picture here in wrapping up this entire first part of this episode is that like there's like so much turbulence in this race right now, but there's actually like strangely I'm wondering, like everybody's like there's going to be this, you're just waiting for the shoe to drop or whatever. There's part of me that's like maybe the most likely scenario is just like the little things, you know, like the Robinson thing is a big thing if you live in North Carolina, but it's little in the grand scheme of the presidential election. Like may move a couple votes here and there. And I think it's really possible that that's how we live out our days until November, is that there's just these little movements, you know?
Yes, but I also think that it is justified to work very hard to nationalize the Robinson story as much as you can, because it really drives home the unreasonableness of Trump and Vance, right? Because if people know about Robinson, particularly if women know about Robinson, and then, you know, you're able to pose the question of what does it do to the credibility of Donald Trump and JD Vance if they can't disavow this guy, right? It's the move that they're constantly playing on us.
Yeah. Well, let's take an ad break. When we come back, we're going to look at the ground game for Trump. We're going to look at his confusing early vote messaging. And then we're going to just zoom back out. We're going to talk about polls. We're going to talk about messaging. We're going to talk about the Electoral College. And then we'll go down ballot and check out some things happening under the presidential ticket.
Are you interested in having hair that grows faster, stronger, and longer, having visibly thicker volume, experiencing noticeably less shedding? All of this is possible with Nutrafol. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement brand trusted by over 1 million people. See thicker, stronger, faster-growing hair with less shedding in just 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol. Nutrafol supports healthy hair growth from within by targeting key root causes of thinning: stress, hormones, aging, nutrition, lifestyle, and metabolism through whole body health. While many supplements rely solely on ingredient studies, Nutrafol clinically tests final formulations to ensure their efficacy. In a clinical study, 72% of men saw more scalp coverage after taking Nutrafol men's hair growth supplement for 6 months, and 86% of women saw improved hair growth after taking Nutrafol women's hair growth supplement for 6 months. With a Nutrafol subscription, building a hair growth routine is simple. Purchase online, no prescription required. Automated deliveries and free shipping keep you on track. Plus, you can save up to 20%. You'll have access to free naturopathic doctor consults, and a Headspace membership is included. Get results you can run your fingers through. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com and enter the promo code MAJORITY. Find out why over 4,500 healthcare professionals and stylists recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code majority. That's Nutrafol.com, promo code majority. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. As an adult, I always try to carve out time to learn new things because, well, it's important. Kids are always learning and growing, but as adults, sometimes we lose that curiosity. What's something that you'd like to learn? Gardening, a new language, or maybe how to finally beat your best friend in bowling? Therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder because your back to school era can come at any age. I've personally benefited from therapy. It's helpful for learning positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself, and it isn't just for those who've experienced major trauma. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/M54 today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/M54.
All right. Well, we are now in early vote season. So election day is basically today and every day between now and the election. And, the Harris team has an extensive ground game where they're pushing people to go vote. I think Democrats have a pretty strong history here. Back in 2020, Trump was telling his people that mail-in voting and early voting was fraudulent and that may have cost him the election. He has attempted to clean this up, but has been sending some mixed signals. Let's go to a video of him talking to his supporters on this.
Saw it right away. You know that, right? Now we have this stupid stuff where you can vote 45 days early. I wonder what the hell happens during that 45. Let's move see these votes. We've got about 1 million votes in there. Let's move them. We're fixing the air conditioner in the room, right? No, it's terrible. What happened the last time was disgraceful, including right here.
He just can't help himself.
It's inspiring. It's an inspiring early vote message. Let me read you Vance's message on this. We got 3 ways to vote now: early voting, vote by mail, and voting on election day. And look, I'm a firm believer that we ought to have election day in this country and not election season, but we are where we are. So we've got to take advantage of all the pathways to vote. That's inspiring, honestly.
Yeah, it's basically like, I know that I need you to vote early, but I also need you to hate voting early. And it's like, so, a lot of people are not going to go vote early as a result.
Trump's message is they're going to move. First of all, in any normal situation, like after January 6th and everything, the idea that he is still doing this, he's doing it again, right? He is setting up again to do the exact same thing, right? Now that is a scandal in and of itself, and that should be front page news every single day. And it is absolutely disempowering and confusing to his supporters to be like, you should do this thing, which was the second part of that clip. And it was unenthusiastic and not super clear. And they're going to try to fix the air conditioning and take all those votes that you voted early. Yeah. They're going to just tally those to the Democrats. Yeah. So it's like, well, then why am I voting early? Like, right. It's confusing.
When I was Secretary of State, it was constantly frustrating that every member of the legislature viewed themselves as an elections expert because they had all been in at least one election as a candidate, which was fine. I'd be fine if every voter views themselves as an election expert because they've voted in elections. The problem was that every candidate, every bill they came up with having to do with elections had to do with making elections work better for the candidates. Right. Because that was their perspective. So few of them understood that the idea here was to create more fairness for the voter. And that is, and look, Republicans were much more guilty of that than Democrats. And Trump is a great example of that, right? He lost an election and he thinks early vote is the reason, so he has to hate it. When I promise, no matter who you're voting for, early voting is far more convenient for you.
Yeah. Well, there's this great piece in New York Magazine by Ed Kilgore that kind of expands out this larger question, not just of early vote, but also ground game. And it asks the question, is Trump's ground game good enough? And has some really interesting details. Biggest one is that typically the ground game is supervised by a combination of the campaign itself and the party committee, the DNC, the RNC, right? And it's called the coordinated. You are well aware of this, Jason. You took advantage of it, I'm sure. And basically the way this works is
shout out to Carla Thiemann, who ran the coordinated campaign in 2012. The only reason I became secretary, not the only reason, many reasons, a deciding factor in me becoming Secretary of State. It's super important.
It is as American as apple pie. I was in Columbus in 2008. It was a combination of Jeremy Bird and Adisu Demisi, who's been on this podcast before. And like basically what happens is you walk into an office in Columbus, and no matter what you're running for as a Democrat, everybody's working together. And it's an efficient, smart way to do things. The Trump campaign is not doing this. They have even though that he got his relative to run the RNC, for some reason he doesn't want the RNC to run the equivalent of the coordinated and run the ground game. They're outsourcing it to political action committees, including one backed by Elon Musk that was populated by former DeSantis people. And they are running what appears to be a chaotic, unconventional voter contact operation that is really focused on low propensity voters. And Ed Kilgore in New York Magazine has asked the question, like, is this risky? Is this going to cost him the election?
Well, let's talk about why he's doing it, right? Because it's a shortcut. I mean, to do the coordinated campaign, you have to raise money in a certain way, right? You have to raise under the limits and the rules that have to do with raising into the party committee and have to do with raising into the campaign. With a super PAC, you don't have to follow those rules. With a super PAC, Musk can give $45 billion, and so that's the shortcut, right? And so what they're thinking is, well, let's just run this stuff out of the place because they don't have the same number this year of small dollar donors that we do. They don't have the low dollar enthusiasm that we do. So I think their shortcut is, let's run it out of a super PAC. Let's run it out of several super PACs, which can't talk to each other, which means if you're in Wisconsin, you're going to get, targeted by multiple different super PACs, but not in an efficient way, not in a way that's like, okay, 7 days out, we're doing this. 6 days out, we're doing this. 4 days out, we're asking people, what is your plan for election day? You know what I mean? You're not going to have that stuff. And then you're going to have wasted resources where if somebody voted early, for instance, okay, but your other super PAC doesn't know. So instead of them then spending their time on somebody else, they're still spending their time on you. So it could be a huge problem for them and a big advantage for us, potentially.
And traditionally what happens here is that these coordinated campaigns, there's an aura around them, right? You go work for the Democratic coordinated campaign 2008 or 2020 or 2024. That's like the way you get involved in politics. And you're proud. You go home, you tell your parents, I worked on the Obama campaign. I worked on the Biden campaign. I worked on, for the Republicans. I worked on Romney. I worked on Trump or whatever.
And you did.
And you did.
And you also worked on the gubernatorial campaign in your state. You worked
right. You get to know people and all that. PACs are so much harder to recruit people for. Yes, they pay checks, but you get mercenaries. You don't get the true believers. And that has a short and long-term problem for these campaigns.
Well, you said something a moment ago that's important. They're using the DeSantis people to do it, who we know have an incredible record of running a field campaign out. No, they don't. They did this. Yeah. That's where this thing has been tried, which is DeSantis was the one who first tried this. Like, let's run a field campaign out of a super PAC. And we know what happened. It did not work.
Well, it's even worse than this. I did an episode of Lost Debate about this a couple of weeks ago where I interviewed Tara Palmieri from Puck, where she did an article about the movement in these PACs. And essentially what happened is over the summer, I think Trump realized there were all these DeSantis people and fired a bunch of them in the middle of the summer, pushed the PAC to fire all these people. So there was already there was a mess, and it was even messier where there was like this huge period of time over the summer where typically, as you know, you're doing voter ID and persuasion, right? You're identifying, for the listeners, there's different phases of get out the vote or ground game. There's voter ID, which happens like basically for months and months and months. You're just trying to figure out who are these people, how are they likely to vote, ask them over and over again what their sort of, inclinations are. And then you spend this period of time trying to convince them to support your people, which I think is the most suspect part of the ground operation. And like, unless you have neighbor to neighbor, it's not as effective. But then the really effective part of it comes in, okay, you now have all this data from talking to all these people. At this point in the campaign is turnout time. This is where it really matters. The problem the Trump team may be facing, among many others, is if you don't do those other parts, it's really hard to do the turnout part right. And that's probably going to be the issue here.
Ravi, it looks to me like they are running the field part of this campaign, the organizing part of this campaign, the way that the Trump administration ran the government, which is everybody loot and take everything you can. I promise. I mean, that's what happens when you have a bunch of super PACs doing things. Then what they're doing is it's a bunch of consultants who can go out there, and what they're turning out are billionaires who can finance their super PAC, and they're just like treating them like suckers. I don't know anything about the one that's backed by Musk, but I would bet my paycheck on the idea that the consultant who is in charge of it is going to get a summer house out of the thing.
Right.
That's a certainty.
Well, we're going to take another break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the campaign messaging, the ads that the different campaigns are running. We're also going to talk about the polls, and then we'll go down ballot. We'll talk about everything from Ohio to North Carolina to Texas. Is Texas on the map this year? When we come back.
Typical children's vitamins are basically candy in disguise, filled with 2 teaspoons of sugar, unhealthy chemicals, and other gummy junk growing kids should never eat. That's why Hiya was created, the pediatrician-approved, super-powered, chewable vitamin. While most children's vitamins are filled with 5 grams of sugar and can contribute to a variety of health issues, Hiya is made with 0 sugar and 0 gummy junk, yet it tastes great and it's perfect for picky eaters, i.e. kids. Hiya fills in the most common gaps in modern children's diets to provide the full body nourishment our kids need with a yummy taste that they love. Formulated with the help of nutritional experts, Hiya is pressed with a blend of 12 organic fruits and veggies, then supercharged with 15 essential vitamins and minerals, including vitamin D, B12, C, zinc, folate, and many others to help support immunity, energy, brain function, mood, concentration, teeth, bones, and more. It's non-GMO, vegan, dairy-free, allergy-free, gelatin-free, nut-free, and everything else that you can imagine. Hiya is designed for kids of all ages and sent straight to your door so parents have one less thing to worry about. As you know, I'm a father, and I'm always on the lookout for the best possible vitamins for my child to take. I'm so happy that I've come across Hiya Health. The ingredients are amazing, and I don't have to worry about sugar or gummy junk because Hiya Health is made without that stuff and is still able to keep the great taste, which is super important because that's how you get kids to eat it. We've worked out a special deal with Hiya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you must go to hiyahealth.com/majority. This deal is not available on the regular website. Go to hiyahealth.com/majority and get your kids the full body nourishment that they need to grow into healthy adults.
All right. Well, let's talk about campaign messaging. There was a really fascinating article about just like how are these campaigns spending their money? And the interesting conclusion here, and this was in Politico, is that, generally speaking, you're spending a lot of, and this is looking specifically at the PACs, which have the highest sort of spend on ads at this point, especially given the current campaign finance laws, that typically these PACs are where you do the attacking. Right. Like, because the PACs don't have to say paid for by Kamala Harris or paid for by Donald Trump. You don't, get the backlash that you would for having to put your name to it. And in prior cycles, about 60% in 2020, for example, were spent in opposition to Trump, negative Trump ads. This time, 80% of the outside spending by Democrats is being spent on positive ads about Harris. Meanwhile, 90% of the Republican spend on ads in their PACs are negative on Harris. So this is a bit ahistorical, but probably easily explained by the fact that Harris was new on the scene and there's a race to define her.
Yeah, and everybody, you know what you think about Trump at this point. Like, there's nobody out there that's like, I'm just trying to get a handle on what kind of a person Donald Trump is. Like that doesn't exist. And so as a result, like, why waste your energy? If somebody thinks like that Donald Trump is an okay dude, at this point, you are not going, and this applies to our listeners too. You're not going to convince them otherwise. You've got to
Yeah.
go at it in a different way. Whereas a lot of people are still like, I'm not sure what I think about Kamala Harris. Like, I run into these people. I meet people who are like, well, I don't like Donald Trump, but I don't really know her. Is she our best option? And that kind of thing. And so I end up just talking about, knowing her personally, and maybe I win over that one person. But that's what these are meant to do, is to define her accurately and positively.
And, we'll just get a sense of what some of these ads sound like on the Republican side of things. Let's play this ad on the Republican side called Clueless.
Their Bidenomics led to the highest inflation in 40 years, highest gas prices ever, skyrocketing interest rates, unaffordable housing, incomes down, unemployment rising, and a recession now headed our way. Yet Kamala Harris is clueless.
We are very proud of Bidenomics. Bidenomics is working.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
Look, I'll just say I think it's an effective ad. Like, obviously, I'm not convinced, but
Yeah, there's like a bunch of outright lies or distortions in there, right? Like the fact that most economists don't think we're heading towards a recession, for the example. The idea that we had the highest X prices ever is always going to be true. Like,
right,
by and large,
that's how things work over time.
Yeah. I can go through all those. The unemployment, for example, is still at near historic lows, especially given the fact that they had to raise interest rates to tamp down inflation and still kept employment fairly high. The wages argument is wrong. I mean, I don't have to go through all this, but yes, this is what their campaign should sound like if it were normal, right? But when Trump opens his mouth, all you just heard is not what he's saying. And so the question is, can his ads make up for that deficit?
Well, what you have to imagine is you have to listen to this with the ears of the person who the Trump campaign has identified as persuadable in their direction, right? Who they could get, but who Harris could also get. And that person, as a friend of ours described it on this show at one point, Stephen Weber came on and spoke really eloquently about this, that, that person is somebody who, for whatever reason, hasn't had a pay raise in 3 years, right? And they're, regardless of, the upward trajectory of the economy, there's plenty of people who fit that profile. Somebody who, maybe their healthcare hasn't improved during that time. They, like a lot of people, didn't get what they were hoping to get on student loans. Now, it was because it was blocked by Republican judges and elected officials, but they didn't get it. So, like, that's who you're trying to take those factors in a person's life, and you're trying to give them someone to attribute and blame that on. And if they're a lower information voter, and you don't even have to be that low information of a voter to be convinced of those things, because most people don't pay attention to trends like inflation and unemployment and that sort of thing.
Well, this comes amidst, I think, some rather confusing polling. By and large, polling has been fairly good for Harris. Like, most of the models, including the most pessimistic of all election prediction models, which was Nate Silver's model, they all now have Harris as a slight favorite, but slight, 60-40, 55-45, right? So this is still a pretty narrow election. And Nate Cohn, the other Nate, wrote an interesting piece in the New York Times that asked the question, like, well, what is this electoral college bias that we call it, or electoral college penalty, right? We've talked about it on this podcast before. Nate Silver puts it as at anywhere from 2 to 4% of the vote, meaning you need to outperform nationally 2 to 4% in order to win the electoral college or maximize your chance
as a Democrat.
As a Democrat, right? Now, what Nate Cohn wrote is that, well, there's a lot of reasons to believe that this bias may be shrinking. And among other reasons why he gave this, he cites polling data, he cites past performance in the elections. He makes an argument that actually a lot of Trump's, increases in support over the past cycle are coming from states that he either already has won or will win in all likelihood, like Texas, Florida, places like that, or in states that he will not win, like upstate New York, where I am right now, or in Central Valley, California, and places like that. And that's where he's gaining ground in the national polls, or at least shoring up some support to make up for lost support elsewhere. And I find this interesting. I'm not sure what to make of this, but this really is the argument about what's going on behind the scenes with this data, right? Like one of these theories will likely be true.
It makes some sense. And the other side of that coin is that when you look at states like Michigan or Georgia, let's take Georgia and Arizona, for instance. And then I would add in North Carolina, is that the reason that those states, there's a few reasons, but one of the reasons those states have gone from, like we'll use Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, that have gone from mostly reliably red to swing purple states, is simply because they've become more diverse. They've become younger, right? Certainly, like with Georgia, what Stacey Abrams did is she didn't actually make Georgia more diverse. She just made the diverse population of Georgia more registered and more likely to vote at a proportional rate, right? And as you do those things, what you're really doing is you're making those states much more like America, right? As a whole, like, you know, in Missouri, everybody talks about the fact that until, 2008, Missouri was the bellwether state. It was the state where, with one exception, over 100 years, the winner of the presidential election won Missouri. And the reason that Missouri was that way for so long and stopped being that way is because it went from being a state where you could take the demographics of the country and lay them on top of Missouri, and they matched up perfectly. And then that gradually ended. Missouri got the Latino population in Missouri did not grow the way it grew in the rest of the country, and it got older as the country was getting younger. And so as a result, now it's a red state. But when you look at Georgia, when you look at Arizona, when you look at North Carolina, much more than in the past, those states are increasingly looking more and more like America. And so I think that would account for the idea that the Electoral College edge should be receding slightly. Whereas I don't know that that's the case in, say, Wisconsin or Pennsylvania, but I think it is in those three other swing states, potential swing states in North Carolina's case.
It's interesting because, like, he wrote this in the New York Times 2 days before Kristen Soltis Anderson, the Republican pollster, wrote a piece basically applying the opposite, saying, all right, and she was looking at the New York Times Sunbelt polls, which were not good for Democrats, which North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona showed like 4 or 5 point advantage for Trump in polls that had previously shown Harris up. So in some of these states, they're showing a 10-point swing. At the time when there was a debate that Harris won, which is really odd,
This is the time when it's really important to remind people how polling works.
Yeah.
Because if you don't understand how polling works, then what you assume is that one poll can be compared to another poll, right? And that, well, here's what polls are not. Polls are not, let's ask 600 people what they think and then see what happens. And they're also not, usually they're not, let's then ask the same 600 people again a month later. That's not usually what they are. What they usually are is they work one of two ways, usually a mix of both. A pollster has to create a model for what they're going to poll, which means the pollster is, by virtue of their work, literally putting their finger on the scale. So in order to create a model, a pollster has to say, I think that this percentage of the electorate is going to be, people under 30. I think this percentage is going to be people of color. This percentage is going to be people who identify as Democrats. This percentage is independents. This percentage is Republicans. Once you've done that, you've already done things to bias the result. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm just saying that's the science of polling. And so, you just got it. That's why any operative, any candidate, and you know this, Ravi, always wants to look at the crosstabs, always wants to know, how did you weight this thing before they draw any conclusions?
Yeah. And I think, like, there's also a difference in quality between national, like these media polls and what the campaigns themselves are doing, because these are very expensive, and often for the media, New York Times is what one of the more well respected of the media polls, but by and large, like the difference between a high quality poll and a lower quality poll could be like 10x.
Mhm.
And the campaigns are more incentivized to overinvest in more accurate polls than the media, who just like getting any poll out there really helps get eyeballs on things. And so the unfortunate thing for you as the audience is you don't have access often to these polls that the campaigns have. So you have to kind of read the tea leaves and talk to people or listen to people who talk to the people on the campaigns, right? And from what I understand about the Harris polling is that they have her as the slight favorite, that she's slightly ahead in most of these states, like the ones that she needs to win: Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And that in Nevada, Arizona, and North Carolina, it's basically a tie. Nevada has been tricky. I think there's a little bit of worry about that state. And so basically, but how would that change your behavior? Like if you're a campaign, yeah, there's resource allocation and you're going to learn more in those polls. Like how do they view Harris on the economy and all? That's really why they're polling,
Yeah.
right? Because the difference of 2 to 3 points isn't like, especially when you take into account the confidence bands and the error rate and all of that, that's not going to tell you much, right? They're not that fine-tuned of instruments. But if it's telling you there's like a sizable portion of people who aren't confident in Harris on the economy or have major character concerns about Trump, like these are really important things to know.
For the campaigns, the polls are a tool to figure out what works and doesn't work, right? And what people are open to hearing about, right? Like I promise you that when the top people at the Harris-Wallace campaign look at when they get polls back, I doubt they're even that interested in the top line number at this point. They want to look at the messaging that week and how it played and whether it moved at all, up or down,
Right.
and what the other side is saying that is working, right? And what they're saying, they do what are called benchmark polls, where you will literally say to the viewer or to the respondent in the poll, Donald Trump says this about Kamala Harris, and you will introduce the information even if they've never heard it, or if you think they're going to hear it but they haven't yet, you think it's something Trump's going to say in the next week. Donald Trump says this. Does that make you more likely to vote? How much more likely? How much less likely to vote for Harris? And then they'll say, okay, here's what Kamala Harris says about that. Do you find that more or less likely to vote for Harris? That's what they're interested in, right?
Yeah, and like where do you get your information? Things like that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's go down ballot for a second. So we've got this really important Senate race in Ohio where Sherrod Brown is somehow still in it, in a state that Democrats have really struggled in recently. And he's running against this gentleman, Moreno, who had some things to say about the female vote in his state. Let's go to this video.
Senate candidate Bernie Moreno is getting harsh backlash tonight because of comments he made over the weekend about women who support reproductive rights. NBC4 obtained a video recorded at a Warren County town hall during which Moreno accused suburban women of being focused solely on their ability to get an abortion and questioned why it would even be an issue for older women.
The left has a lot of single issue voters. Sadly, by the way, there's a lot of suburban women. A lot of suburban women that are like, listen, abortion's it. If I can't have an abortion in this country whenever I want, I will vote for anybody else. Okay, a little crazy, by the way, but especially for women that are like past 50, I'm thinking to myself, it's an issue for you. Oh, thank God my wife didn't hear that one. Oh, they get in trouble.
Always good when a candidate has to say, when he's talking about women's issues, and he has to say, thank God my wife didn't hear that one. Always a really good sign that you nailed the answer there, Bernie.
Yeah, I mean, he's doing the best he can to keep that one close. And so we'll keep an eye on that. I think like there's a lot happening in Ohio, obviously with Springfield and Vance and DeWine. I wouldn't be shocked if just weird things happen in Ohio in this race. I really don't. I wouldn't be shocked at all.
Well, for one thing, Sherrod Brown is a guy
strong. Very
just
strong.
always punches above his weight. I mean,
Yeah.
Sherrod Brown is, I mean, it's actually a perfect contrast there, right? Because Sherrod Brown is a guy who is the consummate, I don't agree with this guy and everything, but I know he cares about me and my family. That's why Sherrod Brown wins elections, because that's true and it comes across, right? And then Moreno, I mean, look, that is so clearly at the, what he just said is so clearly at the heart of what turns a lot of people, particularly women, off about today's Republican Party, which is the inability to conceive of how somebody could care about something that doesn't immediately affect them. Like, that is the heart of the Republican philosophy, and it turns off a lot of voters, particularly women.
Well, let's go to another state here. Let's go to Nebraska. I had not been following this very closely, but we have an independent candidate in Nebraska, this gentleman, Dan Osborne, who was described by Slate's David Ferris as a Navy veteran who looks and sounds as if he were designed in a lab to reverse Democrats' fortunes with non-college educated white voters. So, and this is the New York Magazine describing him. He's a big union guy and is pro-choice, but is conservative on guns and immigration. More recently, he kept his distance from the unpopular national and state Democratic parties, and won't say whom he will caucus with. Yeah, he's in Indiana. Let's go to his ad that he just put out. Yeah, and he's polling neck and neck. And this is the ad that he put out.
The U.S. Senate is a bunch of millionaires controlled by billionaires. My opponent, Deb Fischer, is part of the problem. She's taken so much corporate cash, she should wear patches, like NASCAR. She's gotten 10 times richer in the Senate. She hasn't held a public town hall since 2017. She promised to cut the deficit. She lied. She signed a 2-term pledge, lied about term limits too. Deb lies. We just get stuck with the bill. Thanks, Deb. More of our money wasted. I'm Dan Osborne, an industrial mechanic who's actually worked for a living, a Navy vet, Nebraskan, independent. You're gonna hear a lot about me from Deb's donors. The truth is, I'm running for U.S. Senate because people aren't getting a fair shake. Costs are too high, the border's a mess. People like Deb waste our tax dollars on handouts to billionaires and corporations. If you want someone who works for them, vote for Deb. If you want someone who works for you, consider me. I'm Dan Osborne. I approve this message because the only thing on the back of my jacket is Nebraska.
Okay, I love this ad.
Strong ad.
Yeah. And for those who are listening on audio, one thing I think is important to point out, the aesthetics here, every appearance I've seen from Osborne, his sleeves are rolled up, not in the way politicians usually are like, I'm rolling up my sleeves. They're rolled up so that you can see his tattoos on his forearms. And I think I'm right about this, that basically the Democratic Party stood down in this race. There's not really a Democratic candidate. Am I right?
Correct.
So he's got the whole field. His idea is to get what you can in on the left in Nebraska, and then get as much of the middle as possible to win. And it's, for those who don't know, this is not there's a tradition to this in Nebraska, not necessarily at the U.S. Senate level, but for one thing, Nebraska is the only state in the country that has a unicameral legislature. All they have is a state Senate. They don't have a House. And I can't remember if they were trying to change this. I don't think they have changed this yet. That you don't run under a partisan label for their state Senate. Now, people know whether you are an R or a D, but they don't. They do things like they vote for their chairs. There's a long independent tradition in Nebraska, and I think this can work.
I mean, this would really change the map because Democrats they have a brutal Senate map, right? Brutal. And we've got to expect that we're going to at least lose one of the tough ones, whether it's Brown, who we just talked about. The polling hasn't looked great for him there, although he like Brown, he always punches above his weight, but he's running up against numbers that are very hard to overcome as a Democrat, like net -10, like, he's going to have to outperform Harris by 10 plus, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And you know what this is like. What did you outperformed Hillary by what? In
16.
16, and you still didn't win that election.
Yeah. Still got the silver medal.
Yeah. So it's like, this is tough stuff. It's not to say anything about who they are. So this guy having a competitive race in Nebraska is huge. And we can also look to some other states for some hope here. One of them that I've been watching closely is the Texas Senate race involving Ted Cruz, where there have been multiple polls that have it within the margin of error recently. +1 Cruz, +2 Cruz. This is promising. Now, there are some sort of storm clouds on the horizon here, but the GOP officials down there seem to be alarmed. We're going to play you a video of the Travis County GOP chair. I think this is Austin, Travis County. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
GOP chair on some kind of podcast talking about their worries about this race.
How do you rate that race? Is it going to be as close as it was in 18? Are Republicans a little bit antsy on that? What do you think is going to happen with Cruz and Allred?
It's very antsy right now, to be really candid. And look, the public polling has showed this race to be close now for 2 or 3 months. Colin Allred is able to spend basically 3 times as much money as Cruz is, and that's always going to have an effect. In the end, I do believe Trump will win Texas by a large enough margin that it will carry Cruz across, but I think Cruz will underperform Trump.
Yeah, I think that's about it. Reminds me actually quite a lot of my race from 16 is, how much can Allred overperform by, and how big does but it's harder because it's like, how big does the party come in? Because you pointed out on social media this week that while Allred has raised a lot more money, the reservations on television from the Republicans going down the stretch are much higher. So like, how much can get committed to that race? Can you actually make it work?
Yeah, and it's actually, he's wrong about the money side. So Cruz has raised more money and has more money in the bank than Allred has. It's actually closer than I thought.
Allred, I think, is like been outspending him on TV recently, but that's about to end.
3x. Yeah, 3x. So according to ad spend or something it's called, or ad tracker, Allred has been outspending Cruz 3x in money already spent, but Cruz has 11.5 times more reservations.
Right.
11.5. Now
you have to pay for that. That's the
yeah,
thing.
it's him and
it's
him and the PACs. That's the thing that's hard to figure out here, because if you look at just what the campaigns have, it's neck and neck in terms of money in the bank. Cruz has raised more than Allred. Allred and Cruz essentially have the same amount of money in the bank. But you got to imagine that there's most of the money being spent here is going to be spent by outside groups. And that's probably what's accounting for the 11.5 difference there. So if you're listening to this, and maybe this is a good grab and or, you should go donate money to Allred, because this is a winnable race. Now, this is it's a tradition for us to talk about Texas being a flippable state, but one day we'll be right. This could be the year. And Cruz is such a deeply unpopular figure. Allred's such a strong candidate. Let's roll the dice here. Let's give him some cash.
A couple others, I've heard people talking about, not with a great deal of optimism, but with, hey, we may need to try and put this on the map to have a chance. I've heard people talking about Florida.
Yeah.
And that race. I mean, and what Florida and Missouri have in common, because it's Scott who's up in Florida, right?
Yep. Rick Scott.
Yeah. What Florida and Missouri have in common is they both have incumbents that are just basically jerks, and that people will vote for because they're Republicans. But the people who are like going to the polls, like, I cannot wait to vote for Josh Hawley. It's not a huge contingent. And so here in Missouri, you do have Lucas Kuntz, who's a Marine vet running.
I'm looking up those polls now. I haven't looked at those in a while.
There have been a few in Missouri recently that do show the race closer. And look, I'm an interested party here in terms of, I live in the state and I'm interested in the ongoing party building that can be done here, because I'd like our state I'd like to once again at some point be represented by a Democrat statewide. But I think that, in order to get there, we got to have more of these competitive races. So, that's my pitch for the possibility of people investing in Missouri as well. And also because hey man, it's probably a dopamine hit just giving money against Josh Hawley, no matter what happens.
For sure. I mean, yeah, I'm looking at these numbers. So you've got, Kuntz's polls that he put out on September 12th have Hawley up 4. Change Research, Hawley +5. Emerson, which is pretty good poll, Hawley +12 at the same period of time that the Change put up +5. So who knows, but definitely possible, and obviously a lot of Missouri listeners here. And you still have the abortion measure on the ballot, right?
Yes, we do. And, by the way, we shouldn't forget Arizona. Ruben Gallego is well, and actually, by the way, while we're talking about Missouri, Crystal Quaid is the Democratic candidate for governor. Again, a race where I can't say like, oh, it's not a coin toss. Like it's an uphill battle. But it's worth investing in. And then Ruben Gallego in Arizona, who it looks like is going to pull this off.
Yeah, fingers crossed. It's like you never know with Arizona. It's such a wily state that I never trust it till it comes in.
Yeah. What I love about that race, though, is our friend Ruben has just run exactly the race he's wanted to run. Like he just went out and he just did Ruben things. He just said what he wanted to say, and he has not pulled punches, and it seems to be working.
Well, this Missouri piece actually is a good segue for one for us, which is like, it sure would be great if the star quarterback of your team and his wife came out and clarified their political positions. That would probably help Lucas. So if you're out there, Missouri listeners, you should urge your team to clarify their comments, especially given that you have a kicker who doesn't seem to miss. He's sociopathic in his ability to tune out any pressure. Probably is not a coincidence.
I want to be clear. Taylor Swift speaks for us here in Missouri.
Well, this gets to my take.
She is such an honorary Missourian and so frequently here.
Here's my take here. Number one, I looked this up. Kansas City Chiefs are the most hated team in professional sports right now, which makes me really happy. Now,
we earned that.
And I know who you are out there. You got a lot of Kansas City Chiefs fans out there. Anytime I post something great about Josh Allen and you just like remind me he has no rings. One day that's not going to be true, guys. One day you're not going to win. It always comes, there's no dynasty that lasts forever. And hopefully one day my guy is going to win one and you're just going to be jerks. Okay. And
man, we're the villains and that's cool. That's
yes.
all right.
So here's what I'm setting up here. First of all, the Bills look amazing this year.
I need to go back and watch the highlights from that game.
The Bills look amazing and I'm generally pessimistic about them, but here's my prediction. I think the Bills are going to win the Super Bowl either this year or next year, just based on what I'm seeing from this team. And I'm generally pretty pessimistic, but I feel it. And I think it's going to start a run of more than one. And I think this Mahomes versus Allen, Chiefs versus Bills thing, I think is going to be less Colts versus Patriots than something more like Celtics versus Lakers. That's my feeling about it, just based on what I'm seeing from my guy. And the great part of it is that we're America's team now. People are rooting for the Bills. People are rooting for Josh Allen. You could feel it. And people hate your team no matter what their politics. It's actually the one thing that brings us together. The Republicans hate the Chiefs because of Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. The Democrats hate the Chiefs because of Harrison Butker and whatever fair or unfair they think about the Mahomeses. And I feel good. I feel good being just one with the American people. We are America's team. People are rooting for us, and I think we're going to deliver.
This is some JD Vance level bullshit.
That's my one for us. That's my one for us.
This is okay. First of all, the most popular jerseys that are bought in the country are Chiefs jerseys. Travis Kelce's jersey is like, I have friends who travel internationally, and they send me pictures of like store windows in Zurich, and it's like, it's
funny. I was down at Liberty University the other day and I saw a lot of Harrison Butker shirts down there.
Yeah, I bet you did at Liberty University. Yeah. But my point here, if you want to talk about this, is one, look, you know me, I cheer for the Bills when they're not playing the Chiefs. I genuinely do. But what tends to happen, and they play in Buffalo, is that right? I don't really keep track
this year,
of the teams
actually,
that
I
don't
know.
do as well.
There was an incredible amount of years in a row where for some reason we kept coming to you during the season, not even just during the playoffs.
No, I just was joking. Like, and this team you speak of.
Oh, you are coming to us November 17th.
Yeah, we are. Yeah. But what I was gonna say is, look, I always am more worried about the game against the Bills than any other game on the Chiefs' schedule. Almost every year, the last several years. This part of the season, they've looked better than us. Heck, last year they looked better at us at this part of the season. They did the year before that. They tend to beat us in the regular season. So, I think that's how it is. I don't have anything bad to say about Josh Allen. But the idea that you think he is Peyton Manning to our Brady. No. Like
Better is what
he
my
may
point
get
was actually
there.
better. My point is better because Mahomes, Peyton only took one off of Brady. Really, you don't count the Broncos one. I think Allen's going to take a few off of Brady, off of Mahomes.
Maybe, but I don't know, man. We're had some ugly games. We're 3-0 too, and and also you put a big number on the Jaguars. Congratulations. But I got to go back and watch that game. I do like
you guys literally beat us last season. We had no linebackers. We had to call up Aaron Klein, who was literally in a camper on his way to Florida Disney World with his family. He hadn't played football in like a year and a half. And we were still one dumb kick away from tying that game at the end there. But this year, I'm just telling you, and I was pessimistic then. I told you that.
You're optimistic. See,
here's my feeling. I never say 1 year because you're always one Josh Allen injury away from not winning the season.
Somebody else injury or something.
But either this year or next year, we're winning that Super Bowl. That's what I feel.
I want to say I hope that for you, but I have other. I hope. Look, if it's not the Chiefs, I actually do hope it's the Bills. I actually do. All right. My only one for us is like, you've seen my truck. I have a much larger than necessary truck. And I have found myself lately shopping for used trucks and thinking about trading in my truck for an even more stupid truck. And
like an old fashioned one?
No, like, my truck's a 2013. And I've been like, ooh, these 2018s. And this one, I like this one has aftermarket tires, and it's a stupid thing, and it's such like a Midwestern or Southern man in his 40s thing. But I am just like, it is what it is. That's what I like. And my wife, God bless her, seems to be supportive of the fact that right now I'm texting with a gentleman who works at a dealership in Iowa about a truck, and we're sort of dancing around each other. And I may be driving to Iowa to trade in my truck for a newer model. And
car shopping is a lot of fun. I used to do it when I was in Nashville. I had two cars. I had a 79 Ford F-150, which was an amazing truck.
Nice.
And then I had like my normal car. But it's like how I use Zillow. Like I've bought mentally like 1,000 homes on Zillow before. Yeah. I always still, nearly talk myself into buying vehicles all over the country. And then thankfully wisdom prevails, but you actually use your car. So it's,
but I mean, I keep baseball stuff in the back, but I could keep baseball stuff in the back of like a regular SUV if that's what I wanted to do, but I don't. I like trucks. So I have a 2013 F-150 and I'm flirting with the 2018.
Well, tell me what's going to happen in this baseball playoffs. I'm so ignorant of baseball. Like, what's your prediction here? Phillies, Yankees?
I think that's pretty likely. There's some teams that are really hot right now. Look, I'm really excited to see Ohtani in the postseason. I mean, what the guy's been, he's an alien. I mean, it's just incredible what he's been doing. Actually here, the baseball thing going on is the Royals have managed to, we lost over 100 games last season. And then this year we have been in the spot where we would make the playoffs for most of the season now in that wild card spot, or at least half the season. And we just had a 7-game losing streak that included like a scoreless streak. Like we went something like 19 innings without scoring a run. And then last night we finally won 1-0 in the 10th inning. And so there are 5 games to go, and we are in the final wild card spot in the AL. And we are 2 games ahead of the Twins.
That means you would come to us, right? If you get because we're probably the first seed, the Yankees probably.
Well, so the way it works is that they've expanded the playoffs. So the top 2 division winners, which would be the Yankees and the Guardians, will actually get a bye basically to the second round. And then the third division winner, which is going to be the Astros. So basically you have the 3 seed plays the 6 seed, the 4 seed plays the 5 seed. We were the 5 seed. We are now dropped to the 6 seed, and we're trying to hang on to the 6 seed for the last 5 games of the season, including 3 games against the Braves, who are a half game out of the NL wildcard. So they have a lot to play for. And it gets worse, Ravi. You asked this question.
I'm interested.
It gets worse. There's because of this tropical storm coming in, 2 Braves games may get washed out, which means their pitching rotation may make it so that in the 3 final games of the season that we have to play against the Braves, we may have to see Fried and Sale, which is like terrible for us. So Anyway, it's going to be close, man. The Twins may catch us, and the Twins have the tiebreaker. So if we end up tied with the Twins, they win that tiebreaker. So we have 5 games to go. We have to, I think, probably at least win 3 out of 5, maybe 4 out of 5 to
Wow.
get.
Well, good luck out there. It'd
Yeah,
be
it's
cool if you guys
exciting.
eventually make your way to New York. That would be great.
Yeah. I mean, I've told True we'll go to a playoff game. So
yeah, I mean, if it were the old Yankee Stadium, I'd be like, that would be a historic moment. I refuse to go to the new one, and it's like, I don't believe in the concept of these knocking down a historic stadium. So they wouldn't do that at Fenway.
No, anyway, that you can't do that.
Yeah. Well, okay. I think we've probably exhausted the patience.
Audience. Yeah.
Yes.
I think so. All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. If you want to hear more baseball, I'm at Jason Kander on social media. Ravi is at Ravi M. Gupta. Please do leave a 5-star review. We've been doing things a little bit differently lately, messing around with the format a little, sometimes going a little long, sometimes getting into other things. If you do or don't like that or whatever, if there's a recent guest that you really like that you'd like to have come again, or a guest co-host, go on and leave us a review so that, give us some advice. Thank you to the Meidas Mighty. And remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.